Miss Blackwell, it's okay. You're okay. Please try to relax. You are going to be really weak, so don't try and get up just yet,"
a nurse said outside of her field of vision. The voice came from her left. She turned her head and saw the nurse. Her name tag said, Trisha.
"I'm Trisha. I'm your day nurse. Patty is your night nurse. I'll bring her in to meet you when her shift starts. Your throat may hurt a little bit. Your vitals showed you would be waking up soon, so we removed the feeding tube. Are you thirsty at all? You probably won't be hungry for a bit, but we will try and get your stomach into a normal eating pattern tomorrow."
Erin went to speak, but Trisha was right. Her throat did hurt, and it was very dry. Trisha held a cup of water for her to drink using a straw. She was admonished to go slowly. Over the next few days, she was told about her parents and how they both died shortly after midnight the night of the crash. She was also introduced to her social worker, Mrs. Olivia Rathbone. She learned she had been in a coma for a little over 2.5 months. It was July 1st when she woke up. Erin learned that her parents had drawn up wills several years ago and had set everything up for her should they die. Even though Erin was only 17 and still a minor, she was now sole owner of her parents' things. Mrs. Rathbone had taken care of the details with the lawyer that had set up the will for her parents and had already set up a trust to take care of the house expenses until Erin woke up. She would not gain full control of the trust until she turned 18, which would age her out of the system, was adopted, or a family member claimed her. Once she could leave the hospital, Mrs. Rathbone assured her that she would take her to her house, where she could make some decisions. During her coma, the state had hired a lawyer on her parents' behalf, and the driver of the other vehicle was sued for medical expenses and funeral costs, as well as an annuity should Erin ever wake up from her coma. Being in a coma for so long had left her very weak. Her body had once been fairly muscular due to being a gymnast, but now it had atrophied. Her left arm was in a sling still, and her left leg was a hot mess. The only way she could stand was with a metal brace that went the whole length of her leg and was strapped on in several places and help from the nurse. Eventually, she would be able to walk with the brace and a cane, but she was a long way away from that and would take several months of physical therapy. After her first 3 weeks of physical therapy, Mrs. Rathbone took Erin to her house to pick up a few things. She would have to live at a group home now that she was stable and was starting to become mobile. Luckily, she had lived in a ranch-style home, and it was easy enough to move around by holding onto furniture and walls. Erin was using crutches to maneuver. Her left arm, while weak, was still able to hold onto the crutch. Mrs. Rathbone had told her to take as long as she wanted to spend time in her parents' room or her own to gather clothing. She advised that she should not take anything of value so that it didn't get damaged or stolen by other kids at the group home. Overcome with grief, she hobbled out to the backyard and sat down on one of the patio chairs. She was sitting near one of her dad's roses. He had loved planting roses and maintaining them. These were a rose type called teacup. Unlike with dogs, teacup did not mean small. It meant these blooms were so large they were the size of a teacup. This rose was Erin's favorite of them all. It was the only one that had yellow petals with a red tip that bled down to the rest of the yellow petals, causing little lines of red. It never became orange. Instead, the red lines became fainter and fainter the further they went down. The red tips were not a strong red, but it was just enough to know the color. Her father had never been able to find another rose like it. As she sat there, her heart breaking all over again, she reached out to touch the roses that were now in full bloom, their perfumes heavy in the air around her. As she touched it, she felt something strange happen. It was like her grief flowed into the rose bush, turning it black as the whole bush withered and died in seconds. Erin pulled back her fingers as if scorched, but she was fine. She was still grieving, her heart was still breaking, but now her favorite of her father's roses was dead. She buried her face in her hands and cried. From within the house, she heard a doorbell ring, and then voices. Mrs. Rathbone's voice, and a male voice she did not recognize. In a few moments, she heard the patio door slide open. She quickly dried her eyes and looked over. When she laid her eyes on the man stepping through the doorway, she recognized him immediately. She had never seen him in her life, except that this was the man who told her to choose a path at the 5 crossroads in her dreams. His green eyes bored into her own hazel eyes. Within her mind came his voice.
My name is Jacob Blackwell. Dustin was my younger brother. I will explain everything, but you must tell this woman that you know me.
Erin didn't know why she could trust him, but she did.
Uncle Jacob,
She smiled.
they were able to contact you?
He played along.
No, the state did not, but your father's will named me next of kin, along with my address. The legalities took a while, but I have the papers here for your social worker to look over, while we get reacquainted.
He handed the papers over to Mrs. Rathbone to look over, while Jacob guided Erin back into the family room. They sat down, and then Jacob made a strange movement with his hand and spoke a few words that she did not understand. It made the hair on her arms stand up.
There. While she looks the paperwork over, we can speak for a short time without her hearing.
He took a deep breath, unsure where to start.
You had a dream that felt like more than a dream. You eventually encountered a tower and signed your name in a book.
How did you know?
I took the path of the jungle. Which did you take?
His eyes held urgency.
The crypt?
Okay, good. Dustin said he kept dreaming of a maze, but he had become stuck. He never was able to find his tower and sign his name in a book. When you and I did that, we became mages. Has anything unexplained happened to you yet?
She thought back to when she first looked at herself in the mirror at the hospital. Her left eye was no longer hazel. It had turned a pale blue, signifying that it was blind. She had scars from the glass cutting into her all around that eye. They were darker then, but several of the smaller ones had already begun to fade. Her anguish at her new life seemed to flow out of her as she touched the mirror, hoping it was a cruel joke. When she touched it, the mirror cracked, looking like a spider web.
Yes. A mirror suddenly cracked back at the hospital, and now a rose I just touched withered and died in front of my eyes.
A few tears leaked from her eyes.
It's okay. Your magic is going to be a little wild until you start learning it. I can do that for you. Dustin was not going to be able to teach you, and he knew he would eventually have to send you to me. How long did you have the dreams before you entered the crypt?
They started when I was 6 or 7, I think. Dad got a prescription for a sleeping pill to stop the nightmares.
Jacob nodded.
After he became stuck, our mother gave him those pills so he wouldn't have to keep going back. She showed him how to make them. They suppressed the dream.
Except for the last 2 years, I got them almost every night.
Because you weren't stuck. Your magic pushed through to try and give you a shot at claiming your power. When you were in a coma, you were no longer taking the suppressors, so you were able to get through the dream.
He looked up and saw that Mrs. Rathbone was finishing reading everything over. He muttered a few words, made another gesture with his hands, and the hair on Erin's arms laid back down.
Everything looks in order, Mr. Blackwell. I see the adoption papers have even already been filed, and a court date is set for tomorrow to finalize it. Erin will have to spend the night at the group home.
Why not just let her stay here for the night? I can stay with her, or you can. The hearing is tomorrow. It seems silly to have her go to a strange place for only a night.
The hair was standing up on Erin's arm again, and Jacob's voice seemed to change to her. It was almost hypnotic.
Yes, it does seem silly. I don't see why she can't stay here. It will be easier for her to get around, too.
Olivia conceded. After a few more pleasantries, Mrs. Rathbone left them alone in her parents' house.
What did you do?
Erin asked, rubbing her arms.
A mind control spell. I didn't want to do it, but it is safer for you to be with me than a bunch of kids that may trigger other spells to inadvertently be cast. What you are doing while untrained is called vulgar magic. Around non-mages, it is very dangerous. It can create paradoxes, even death. You were lucky you were alone both times it happened to you. I know you are going to have a lot of questions, but I need you to hold off on them just now. Let's start going through the house and figure out what you want to keep. Tonight, when it gets dark, I'm going to lead you through some spell work. I need to gather a few ingredients. Can I leave you here for a few hours? I can go get what I'm missing and grab us dinner.
Erin nodded.
Okay. Start looking around. Don't worry about how much you want to take. We will find a way.
He made a gesture a little like a magician doing sleight of hand, and a pack of colored dots appeared in his hand, like one would use for garage sales.
If you place a red dot on something, it means you don't want it. I want you to leave the orange dots alone for now, but use the green and yellow dots to your heart's content on the things you do want to keep. Don't waste any on your items in your room unless it's something you don't want. Otherwise, we will assume you want to keep anything that is in your room. Sound good?
What's wrong with the orange dots?
We will likely be using them tonight after the spell work.
Okay.
I will only be gone for a few hours, I promise. And don't worry about marking any family pictures or albums. We will be taking them with us.
Erin nodded and he quickly left, leaving her all alone in the house. She started with her parents' bedroom. She and her mother were close in size, or at least had been. Erin was now much skinnier than her mom had been due to the coma. Their feet, at least, were the same size. She looked over her mother's clothing and shoes and set aside the items that would fit or could be modified easily to fit. She also took a few sets of flats and sneakers. She laid these items on the bed and put a green sticker on the top, and then laid the rest of the clothing and shoes on the bed that she either did not like, felt no connection to, or did not fit, in another pile and put a red sticker on top of them. She went over to her dad's side of the large closet and grabbed a few of his sweaters and flannel shirts and put them over to her keep pile. Even though her dad was much taller than her, these would be items she could snuggle into, and they would give her some comfort. Both of her parents had jewelry boxes, so rather than looking through them, she just put green stickers on both. She added stickers to the various furniture in the room, and then headed to the third bedroom that her dad had converted to an office library. She had always loved this desk. It was an antique with hidden drawers. She made sure to put a green sticker on it. By now, she had been alone for several hours and her left hip ached. She sat down at the desk and contemplated all the books and shelves. These were not built-in shelves, but a multitude of modern and antique shelving units. Some even had glass doors. This is where Jacob found her upon his return. He noticed the green sticker on the desk.
I'm glad you like the desk. It's an old Blackwell heirloom. It belonged to our great-grandfather. It was one of the few things Dustin wanted to take with him when he left, so Mom agreed.
Why did Dad leave?
Remember how I told you that magic is dangerous to use around those who don't have it?
She nodded.
Even though Dustin knew about magic, it was dangerous to do any around him. It was not only dangerous to us, but to him as well. Because your father had started his path, even though he didn't finish it, he did gain a few gifts. He would have had a heightened intuition, know when he was being lied to, and he would have never gotten sick. Since your dream started, did you ever get sick?
She shook her head.
It's part of the gifts we all receive, except the being lied to part. That was all him because of the path he took. Each of the paths are different, and the mages that take those paths each have a different nickname. The first path, the one with the fight going on, they are called Mighty Ones. Their path gives them great control over the forces of nature and wardings. The second path, the one with the hedge maze, they are called Enchanters. They have great control over fate and time magics. The third one, which is the one you took, they are called Necromancers. You will have great control over the dead and matter. The fourth path that looked like a gauntlet and the hot floor, they are called Warlocks. They have great control over mind and space magics. The last path, the jungle path, is the one I chose. We are called shamans. We have great control over life and spirit magics. When I say spirit, I'm referring to the nature spirits that reside within objects, or the great spirits of the animal world, or even the spirit of a land. Understand that just because we are strong in our areas of magic, it does not mean that we cannot learn or become strong in other areas of magic. I do not have great strength in death magics, but I can still show you a great deal. Now let's go to the kitchen and eat. It's getting to be dinner time, and you need to eat.
He guided her to the kitchen where there were several takeout bags from Wendy's.
I didn't know what you would like, so I got a little bit of everything and asked for the condiments on the side.
He pulled out one of the kitchen chairs for her and scooted her onto the table. He took the crutches from her and set them nearby. After that, they ate. He chuckled inwardly as he noticed that Erin had many of the same tastes in food as her father. It made him feel a little closer to his niece. Once night had fallen, he brought her into the living room, which had a hardwood floor. He sat her on a chair and brought out the supplies he had bought and brought with him from home. He explained as he made preparations.
I am making us a protective circle, as well as a triangle of manifestation. I am using chalk that has been mixed with bone powder to draw the circle and triangle. I have also prepared a mix of yew and mistletoe to be burned. Mistletoe is poisonous when burned, but we will have it burning next to an open window. The circle will also protect us from any poisonous fumes.
He listed several other herbs that were going into the four corners of the room. He also drew several sigils around both the circle and the triangle and explained what they meant.
One last thing, Erin. I need you to think about a few items that feel like they have the closest connection to your parents. I have their wedding rings here, but I would like at least one other item from each of them. Can you think of any such items?
A book. Dad said it was his favorite. It's called The Count of Monte Cristo. And Mom had this frog figurine she said she's had since she was a little girl. It's on the dresser. He's on a lily pad on his back with a flower overhead. It's a combination of stained glass and a metal.
Okay, I remember seeing the frog. Do you think the book is in the library?
Erin nodded.
It's in one of the glass cabinets by itself. Dad said it's a collector's edition.
Jacob nodded and headed off to grab the items. He wasn't gone long before he came back holding the two items gingerly in his hands. He set them as well as the wedding rings in the triangle, and then joined Erin within the circle. He concentrated on the bowl of incense and then snapped his fingers, causing it to ignite and smolder.
Erin, I need you to focus on your parents. I want you to pour your emotion into wanting them to be here. I want you to remember every line of their faces, any nuance you can think of, the color of their eyes, the shade of their hair and skin. I need you to concentrate and call across the void to them within your mind. Then, I need you to recite these words.
He handed her a sheet of paper with the words written down phonetically.
We'll say them together.
He gave her a few minutes to conjure her parents in her mind, and then he whispered for them to begin. The words were foreign to her, but she found a cadence within them. While they spoke them, Jacob made the appropriate gestures to go along with the words. As they chanted, the sigils, circle and triangle began to glow, one by one. When everything was glowing, two images began to form in the triangle. They continued to chant until they were fully formed. He put out a hand and they stopped together with the last syllable of the chant. Erin gasped at what she was seeing. He knew her instinct was to go to them, but he kept pressure on her good shoulder to keep her seated.
We can't leave the circle, or the spell will break,
he quickly explained.
Jacob, I'm glad to see you under these circumstances.
Dad? Mom?
Yes, honey. We are here. Now that we have been summoned, we can find you easier. It takes a lot of energy to travel as we are, but now that we are closer to some of our anchor items, we can use them to travel.
Dustin said.
Dustin, Carolyn, I will take care of your daughter. I wish you hadn't felt the need to keep her from us.
So, I could hand her over and never see her again.
Dustin, Mom never kicked you out. We never wanted you to keep away from us. We just needed to know when you would be around to ensure your safety. It would have been the same with Erin. We would have been able to train her so that she would have even been able to stay with you for the holidays and summer vacation while she went to a school to better help her control her powers. You could have called me. Instead, I had to wait for her to show up as awakened on the family tree and race to have legal documents drawn up in a hurry.
What's done is done now, Jacob. Mom could have been a little clearer when she asked me to move out.
Why did you deny the money we sent?
Your family sent us money?
Carolyn asked, speaking up for the first time.
They didn't want any part of me because I never awakened as a mage. So I didn't want any part of them either.
Dustin, that isn't true. Mother wanted to speak to you before she died, but you wouldn't answer the phone and our letters were returned unopened. Mom loved you.
It never felt like it, Jacob. You and Scarlett were her golden children, and I was the black sheep.
I have an aunt too?
Dustin looked over at Erin.
I'm sorry, honey. I'm sorry for suppressing your ability to learn magic. I was just afraid I would lose you. Not to mention, how would I have explained it to your mother? She didn't come from a magic family. The school your uncle is talking about is like a boarding school. You would have had to live there most of the year, and you would have only been 7. I couldn't bear it. I know I would have had to tell you soon. I just wanted more time with you having a normal life. Can you forgive me?
Of course, Dad.
We need you to identify your anchors so that they do not get destroyed. Also, it will be easier for Erin to call to you if she has one of your anchors, and it will be easier for you to check in on her if she has one of your anchors close.
They could both feel their anchors, so listed them. The items that Jacob did not know the location of Erin did. They spoke a little longer, but holding this spell was draining to Jacob, who was doing more of the work.
I must conclude this spell before I lose control of it, and potentially damage you both. The pathway has been opened now, so please feel free to visit. I know Erin would appreciate it, and I would like to have my brother back.
They said their goodbyes, and Jacob ended the spell. When everything stopped glowing, Jacob turned to Erin.
How do you feel?
Tired.
It's to be expected.
He made a few gestures and muttered a few words, and the living room was completely clear of all signs of the spell work. He helped her up and encouraged her to head to bed. In her room, Erin sat down on her bed and removed the leg brace. It had many straps above and below her knee, as well as a strap at her waist to offer more stability. She removed the rest of her clothing and looked at her body. There were many surgery scars at her hip and knee. She had to have both a hip and knee replacement, and there were several rods and screws holding her femur together while it healed. They could never be removed now. There were several scars around her shoulder. It had also been shattered, but because the joint didn't hold weight, they were able to use some rods and screws to put her arm together, but her shoulder joint did not need to be replaced. Her time in the coma had allowed her arm to heal completely. It was just weak, and would never be able to bear serious weight. She still had 2 months of physical therapy. She didn't even know where her Uncle Jacob lived. She eased herself to lay down and calmed her mind so that she could fall asleep. On the bright side, she didn't get nightmares anymore.
Hey everyone, hope you loved the video. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe for more awesome sci-fi content. You can also support us by hitting the thanks button at the bottom of the video. Your generosity goes a long way. Every bit helps us bring you more stories from the stars. Thanks a bunch.